Serious, what terrifying confession has someone told you while intoxicated? Was chilling with an older dude with whom I recently started working as a butcher in a grocery store. A couple of beers down and he starts telling me he's been in prison for 17 years. Came out 2 years ago and it's his first ever job at 64 years old. I got curious and asked him what happened if it wasn't too private. Without hesitation, he simply answered, I cut him down with an axe, this piece of shit, and now he's a butcher. Dude must really like his job, I guess. Lamau. Find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Showering off my blackout drunk father because he had shit himself when he started bawling and confessed to being pinned down and raped by his brother's friends. Edit, this comment took off, so I'll elaborate a bit on the facts. I was 16 when this happened. He worked an early shift, so he was always home when I'd get home from school and would be drunk on the average 4 days a week. He was never abusive or angry, just distant. But in that moment when he blurted it out, I could see the pain and weight he was carrying through the tears. I was obviously in total shock, so I just let him sob and talk as I listened. I finished washing him off, then got him to bed where he slept it off. He was blackout drunk, so I knew he'd never remember the conversation, so I kept it to myself. Other than my therapist, I've never told a soul until now. He blamed himself, and there's unfortunately still a stigma surrounding men and admitting sexual assault, but it does happen to them too and needs to be addressed. My father dealt with it in an unhealthy manner for a long time. Whether or not he talked to someone to address it properly, I'll never know, but he has been sober for over 20 years now and much more present in our family's life. This was about 6 months ago now. My brother and I were getting drunk one night because it was the weekend and we just wanted to get ducked up and play video games. We had done plenty of shots and plenty of drinks and we were the definition of fucked up. We were having fun playing some old VoV Zombies for nostalgia, and we paused it to grab some chips. As I was grabbing the salsa, he said to me that he had tried committing suicide about a month prior to this. He had taken some pills and they pumped his stomach and shit, and he told me the whole time he was thinking of me and how shitty and depressed I'd be if he had died and that he'd never want to lose me. I told him I had also tried committing suicide a while ago and I thought the exact same thing about him. We continued playing zombies while talking about everything under the moon, and we've been talking every day since, have never missed and will never miss a day. We're both doing a lot better now and we're both in therapy. It's nice having someone to talk to and trust about these things. Edit, thanks for the awards, y'all. But instead of gifting me stuff, check on your friends and family, and especially people you haven't talked to in a bit. Sometimes we're just too depressed to try initiating conversation. Had a former friend tell me he killed his brother. Didn't help, this was while we were trying to herd his drunk ass to the car as he was crying and yelling it at the top of his lungs. Amazing we didn't end up in cuffs or the very least get stopped and questioned. Come to find out his brother died of a brain aneurysm and that morning he prayed for something to happen to get him out of school that day. He always blamed himself for his brother's death and I get that to a degree. One time, an old acquaintance, F49, and I, M32, were drinking late into the night. She drank much faster than me, and before long randomly and drunkenly confessed to me the following: when her aging and sick mother, whom she despised and was a ton of unappreciated work to care for, was left in her care, she intentionally withheld certain medications and gave her too much of other ones, with the plan being to kill her off. It worked. She told her other siblings that the illness must have finally gotten to her and she passed in her sleep. Since she was already old and sick, there was no autopsy. A minute later she snapped out of it and apologized profusely for telling me that, adding that I am the only person she has ever told. Edit, this is the most likes, comments, awards or anything I've ever received on Reddit on a comment or post. Thanks for all the interesting responses and awards. Hope she doesn't decide it's too risky for you to walk around knowing that. I know, right? She was always a bit shifty and hot-headed. Ages back I was helping a blackout drunk coworker to his apartment, etc. He was needing to be carried 1 second and sprinting across the parking lot the next. As we're getting close to his room he starts breaking down. Why did I hit him? I shouldn't have run, etc. Turns out drunk Diego is pretty convinced he hit a kid with his car one day. Sober Diego has no idea what he was talking about. My mom told me she wished she aborted me when I was 8 or 9 or so. She's doing better now after a long struggle with alcoholism. Our relationship is much better, and when I told her this a few months ago she hugged me tightly and keeps apologizing to this day. Edit, thank you so much for the awards. And everyone who relates, I hope you will find peace and love wherever you may go. Glad she apologized. Not brutal or anything, but my mom admitted to breaking confidentiality to find my dad's birth parents despite him pleading not to. She laughed about it and thought it was the funniest thing about how mad my dad was, That was the day I realized my mom doesn't care about others. My cousin's wife tried to do the same thing, using me. Hess told her numerous times that he wanted nothing to do with his dad or any of his other relatives from that side, but she felt determined. It finally took me screaming duck off with this bullshit before laying into her about respecting her husband's wishes. I still haven't told my cousin about this. My brother was drunk and he told me how he got sexually assaulted by our half-brother when he was 8. And that he knew that our half-brother assaulted me too when I was 5. I had never told my brother about my situation, so I was in shock. My uncle said that my grandfather wasn't exactly a career-loving father because of working in the coal mines. He said my pap was terrified every day because he didn't know if he was coming home or not, cause he'd hear the mountains above him crack. The mines are ducked. My grandpa and his brothers were the first generation in the family not to go down the pits. His father and grandfather both lost their lives in mining accidents. My grandfather used to be a coal miner. His career was cut short when the ceiling above him caved in and crushed him beneath it. He actually managed to survive, though. Hess got permanent injuries and needed a long hospital stay, but he pulled through. The scary thing, though, is that he had been standing in a pretty deep puddle at the time that he was crushed. He fell onto his back and the water was high enough to leak into his ears. Had he fallen face first, he would have drowned in 3 inches of water, unable to push himself up far enough to get his nose to the surface. My grandfather died in a quarry. My grandma still has his hard hat. Gay man dying of AIDS said I could charge my entire bar tab to his credit card cause he was going to die soon. It was me and a few friends watching football, so our tab was probably plus $200, but I was talking to him for a while before he said this. Think he was lonely and scared. So we just watched football with him for the rest of the afternoon. Made him feel welcome and normal, at least for a while. Just wanted what the rest of us do, to not feel alone and that someone cares. I believe his name was Ron. Edit number 2. This was 2001. When I was about 18, I worked for a moving company. They'd hire just about anybody that could lift heavy things, so I worked with all kinds of colorful characters. This one day I was out with this really old guy who was super old school and a real alcoholic. Our first move of the day was in a homosexual area of town in Toronto, and on the drive down my colleague was making a whole bunch of gay jokes. There was nothing I could really say or do, so I just kept quiet and kept on driving. The whole move was really difficult. The apartment hallways were really narrow. The apartment was right at the end of a very long hallway, the elevator was tiny, and the apartment itself had 2 stories with the windy narrow staircase connecting them. When we finally got there, I knocked on the door, and when it opened, the man who answered was literally bawling his eyes out. I looked at my colleague who was looking at this gay man crying very deeply, and my colleague turned to me and said, "I'll be in the truck," and walked away and wouldn't help me with the move at all. Turns out the guy who owned the apartment was moving into palliative care because he had AIDS and was dying. I did that whole move myself, and I'll never forget how devastated that man was as I took all his stuff out of that house. I just wish there was something I could say to help him, but there wasn't, so I just did my job. As someone who's moved a couple of times in the midst of tragic situations, I've been given the kindness and compassion of the movers. Thank you for doing this. It means the world to someone to be given a helping hand when everything else feels like it's falling apart. My ex in college told me once when he was blackout drunk that a few years prior, him and a bunch of other kids broke into a house to have a party. The family that lived there was on vacation or something and were all gone. I'd how they picked the house or knew it'd be empty, sorry. It's been like 12 years, and I forgot some details. They all got drunk and someone decided it would be fun to break a picture on the wall. Then someone else did, too. Eventually it devolved into them all destroying the house. Absolutely everything they could. All the windows were broken. Broke the legs off all the chairs and used them to beat holes into the walls. Ripped and stole clothing. Ripped or burnt all the family photos on the walls and shit. I don't remember all the stuff he said that they broke, but I remember him crying and saying that they ruined those people's lives and there's no way to make it right. I honestly think he was so ducked up that he doesn't remember telling me, because we never mentioned it again. Anyway, like 2 years later, he punched me in the face for asking for a ride to work one too many times, so I guess he was a piece of shit regardless of current situation or alcohol intake. A simple no would suffice, thanks.